Rising from the flat, sunlit edge of Palm Beach, Mar-a-Lago presents itself less as a building than as a proposition, a claim about permanence, privilege, and the performance of power. Its towers and arcades, imported materials and cultivated vistas, announce wealth not as private comfort but as public spectacle, designed to be seen, to be recognized, to be remembered. From its earliest conception, the estate carried an ambition that exceeded domestic scale. It was imagined as a self-contained world, a place where European aristocratic traditions could be reassembled on American soil, translating old-world grandeur into a new context that promised both legitimacy and distinction. In this sense, Mar-a-Lago functions as an architectural assertion that money, carefully displayed, could manufacture lineage, and that space itself could be used to rehearse authority. Yet the power of Mar-a-Lago lies not only in what it displays, but in what it obscures. Behind the ornamental stone and gilded interiors exists an economy of invisible labor. Craftsmen who shaped its details, staff who maintained its illusion of effortlessness, and workers whose presence was essential but rarely acknowledged. Like many monumental estates, its grandeur depended on a careful choreography of visibility and absence. Guests encountered seamless luxury, while the systems that sustained it were tucked away, reinforcing a familiar pattern in which excess is normalized by concealment. The estate thus becomes a metaphor for a broader social arrangement, where elegance is foreground and the cost of maintaining it is quietly absorbed elsewhere. Over time, Mar-a-Lago accumulated layers of meaning that extended beyond architecture. Ownership changed, purposes shifted, and with each transition the building absorbed new symbolic weight. It became a site where private wealth intersected with public attention, where leisure blended with influence, and where personal identity could be amplified through space. Unlike many historic mansions that recede into curated silence, Mar-a-Lago remained active, continually reinterpreted by those who passed through its gates. Its persistence in the public imagination owes much to this adaptability, the ability of the structure to host different narratives without surrendering its core identity as a place of exception. Controversy followed naturally from this visibility. The estate's scale and exclusivity invited scrutiny, not simply for what it was, but for what it represented in an era increasingly aware of inequality and spectacle. Mar-a-Lago became a focal point for debates about access, entitlement, and the blurred boundaries between personal domains and collective consequence. Yet its controversy is rarely confined to any single moment or figure. Instead, it reflects a longer tension embedded in American history, the uneasy relationship between democratic ideals and the allure of concentrated wealth. The mansion does not resolve this tension, it embodies it, standing as both artifact and actor in a story that resists simple moral framing. Architecturally, Mar-a-Lago is a collage of aspirations, drawing from Mediterranean, Spanish, and Moorish influences to construct an atmosphere of cultivated timelessness. This stylistic borrowing is not accidental. It signals a desire to anchor modern fortune in the visual language of endurance, suggesting that wealth, once acquired, can be stabilized through aesthetic continuity. The result is an environment that feels deliberately detached from its surroundings, a controlled illusion that resists the transience of contemporary life. In this way, the estate speaks to a recurring human impulse, to use architecture as a defense against impermanence, to build not just shelter but legacy. And yet, legacy is never fully owned by those who attempt to shape it. Mar-a-Lago's meaning has always been negotiated by observers as much as by its proprietors. For some, it is a marvel of craftsmanship and ambition. For others, a provocation, an emblem of excess that demands interpretation. Its walls hold no single story, only a series of overlapping impressions formed by admiration, skepticism, fascination, and critique. As a symbol, it remains unresolved, an enduring reminder that structures built to project certainty often reveal, upon closer examination, the fragility of the ideals they are meant to uphold. Long before it became a fixture in modern headlines, the land that would hold Mar-a-Lago existed as an expanse of coastal possibility, valued less for what stood upon it than for what could be imagined there. Its creator, Marjorie Merriweather Post, approached the project not as a conventional residence, but as a deliberate act of cultural translation. In the early 20th century, at a moment when American wealth was newly confident, yet still searching for historical grounding, she envisioned a structure that could compress centuries of European aristocratic sensibility into a distinctly American frame. The mansion was conceived as a bridge between worlds, between inherited power and acquired fortune, between the old rituals of nobility and the emerging authority of industrial capital. From the outset, it was meant to endure beyond individual occupancy, a place that would outlast personal relevance and assume a symbolic life of its own. Post's vision was expansive, meticulous, and quietly strategic. She imagined a winter retreat that would rival the grand estates of Europe, not by imitation alone, but by scale, craftsmanship, and intentional permanence. Architects and artisans were drawn from across continents, their labor coordinated into a single aesthetic ambition. Spanish tiles, European stone, and antique elements were gathered and reassembled into a carefully curated illusion of timelessness. Yet this illusion was not accidental deception, it was a conscious statement. By embedding fragments of older civilizations into the structure, the mansion asserted continuity in a nation often defined by reinvention. It suggested that wealth, when disciplined by taste and tradition, could claim legitimacy rather than merely display success. The planning of the estate reflected a belief in architecture as social instrument. Mar-a-Lago was designed not only to shelter, but to host, to frame encounters, ceremonies, and conversations within an environment calibrated to inspire deference and admiration. Its courtyards and corridors were laid out to choreograph movement, drawing the eye and the body through spaces that subtly reinforced hierarchy and order. Every surface carried intention, every vista reinforced the impression of effortless command over space and time. Beneath this harmony, however, lay an immense network of coordination and labor. Hundreds of workers translated vision into material reality, their contributions absorbed into the finished whole, largely unrecorded once the final stone was set. The mansion's coherence depended on this quiet disappearance of effort, an early instance of the invisible labor that would remain central to its identity. Post's personal philosophy shaped the estate as much as any architectural plan. She believed deeply in the civilizing role of wealth, in the idea that great fortunes carried an obligation to cultivate beauty, culture, and order. Mar-a-Lago was intended as a gift to the future, a place that could one day serve a public purpose beyond private enjoyment. This aspiration infused the project with moral complexity. The mansion stood at the intersection of generosity and grandeur, philanthropy and self-mythology. It embodied the tension between sincere civic ambition and the undeniable desire to leave an unmistakable mark on history. In seeking to build something permanent, Post was also negotiating with impermanence, using stone, scale, and symbolism to stabilize a legacy that could never be fully controlled. When construction concluded, Mar-a-Lago emerged not simply as a mansion, but as a worldview rendered in architecture. It reflected an era when American elites sought to anchor their power through physical monuments, translating financial dominance into cultural authority. The estate's origins reveal a careful balance between aspiration and anxiety, confidence and calculation. It was built to reassure its creator that wealth could transcend the moment of its accumulation, that it could be shaped into something enduring and dignified. In this sense, Mar-a-Lago began as an answer to a question many of its time quietly asked: how to make new power appear inevitable, natural, and lasting, before time had the chance to prove otherwise. In its earliest years, the estate functioned less as a private refuge than as a carefully staged social instrument, shaped by the convictions of its owner and the expectations of her world. Ownership carried with it an assumption of stewardship, and the mansion was treated as a setting where wealth could perform its most refined justifications. Gatherings were not casual affairs, but orchestrated rituals, designed to place guests within an atmosphere of cultivated ease while quietly reminding them of the resources required to sustain such grace. The estate's role was to normalize excess by wrapping it in ceremony, hospitality, and an air of cultural responsibility. Within its walls, power was not asserted loudly. It was implied through scale, order, and the seamless movement of service that made luxury appear self-sustaining. The social life of the mansion reflected a belief that influence was most effective when exercised indirectly. Dinners, receptions, and extended stays allowed relationships to form in an environment where hierarchy was softened by elegance. Political figures, financiers, diplomats, and cultural leaders moved through the same spaces, not as equals, but as participants in a shared performance of status. The estate provided a neutral ground where competing ambitions could coexist under the calming illusion of tradition. Architecture played a central role in this dynamic, framing interactions within rooms that encouraged deference without demanding it. Long tables, high ceilings, and carefully controlled sightlines reinforced a sense of continuity and order, suggesting that those invited were stepping into something larger and more enduring than themselves. Ownership also carried a public-facing dimension that blurred the boundary between private wealth and civic aspiration. The estate was spoken of as a future gift, a place imagined to one day serve a national or cultural purpose beyond individual enjoyment. This intention shaped how the mansion was presented and used, lending moral weight to its extravagance. Social events were often framed as contributions to a broader cultural project, moments where privilege could be recast as service. Yet this framing depended on a delicate balance. The estate had to remain exclusive enough to retain its symbolic power while appearing open enough to justify its scale. This tension defined its early social role, positioning the mansion as both sanctuary and stage. Behind the scenes, this social machinery relied on an extensive, largely unseen workforce. Staff members maintained the rhythms of daily life, ensuring that every gathering unfolded without visible friction. Their labor absorbed complexity, smoothing over the logistical realities that made grandeur possible. In this sense, the estate functioned as a microcosm of the social order it represented. The ease experienced by guests was inseparable from the discipline imposed on those who served them, a quiet exchange that sustained the illusion of effortless refinement. Ownership meant command over not only land and structure, but over time, attention, and coordinated human effort, all rendered invisible once the evening lights were lit. The early years established the mansion's reputation as a place where social capital could be accumulated and displayed with subtlety. Invitations carried meaning, signaling inclusion within a carefully curated circle. Absence was equally significant, reinforcing boundaries without confrontation. The estate's social role was not to persuade or debate, but to confer legitimacy through proximity. To be present was to be acknowledged, to return was to be affirmed. Over time, these patterns embedded the mansion within a wider network of influence, its identity shaped as much by who passed through its doors as by those who remained outside them. In this period, ownership was inseparable from authorship. The estate told a story about what American wealth aspired to be: cultured rather than crude, generous rather than grasping, rooted rather than fleeting. Whether that story convinced its audience was less important than the fact that it was told with consistency and care. The mansion's early social life reveals how architecture can be used to discipline perception, guiding how power is seen and remembered. It stood as a physical argument that wealth, properly staged, could transcend suspicion and assume the appearance of legacy, even as the conditions that sustained it remained deliberately out of view. The architecture announced its intentions long before a single guest crossed the threshold. Scale was the first language it spoke, not merely in size but in proportion, the way walls extended beyond practical necessity and ceilings rose higher than comfort required. This was not excess by accident, it was calibration. Every dimension was tuned to remind the visitor of distance between ordinary life and the world the estate represented. Grandeur here was not decorative alone, but positional. It established a hierarchy before conversation began, placing the structure itself in quiet command of the encounter. To move through its spaces was to be subtly instructed in one's relative importance, guided by corridors that widened or narrowed, rooms that either enveloped or dwarfed the body. Materials carried their own rhetoric. Imported stone, hand-painted tiles, and antique elements did more than demonstrate expense. They implied access. These were objects that required networks, time, and knowledge to acquire. signals that wealth had matured into discernment. The architecture performed connoisseurship, suggesting that elite status was not simply about accumulation, but about selection and restraint, however paradoxical that restraint appeared when framed by such abundance. Surfaces were layered with references to distant histories, each allusion reinforcing the idea that the estate's owners belonged to a lineage of taste that transcended national youth. In a country still negotiating its cultural inheritance, the building offered a ready-made past, assembled piece by piece and made to feel inevitable. Spatial organization reinforced this message with quiet precision. Public rooms unfolded in deliberate sequence, each transition carefully managed to sustain a rhythm of anticipation and release. Grandeur was never dumped all at once. It was revealed gradually, allowing the visitor to acclimate to one register of scale before encountering the next. This pacing mirrored the social dynamics the architecture supported. Those invited deeper into the estate experienced increasing intimacy without losing the sense of distance that preserved authority. Private quarters remained elusive, reinforcing the idea that access itself was a privilege carefully rationed. The building taught its own rules, and those rules aligned neatly with elite social customs. Decoration served as both ornament and boundary. Elaborate ceilings, patterned floors, and densely detailed surfaces absorbed attention, directing the eye upward and outward rather than inward. This outward focus discouraged scrutiny, replacing it with admiration. Grandeur became a kind of visual weather, enveloping occupants until it felt less like a choice than a condition. In this environment, questions softened, replaced by a receptive posture shaped by surroundings that seemed to have always existed. The architecture excelled at this transformation, turning assertion into atmosphere. Power did not need to declare itself. It lingered in the air, reinforced by repetition and scale. Yet the appearance of effortless magnificence depended on relentless effort. Behind the symmetry and polished lay systems of maintenance that never rested, grandeur demanded constant correction. Tiles cleaned, stone repaired, gardens aligned with architectural axes that permitted no deviation. This ongoing labor remained deliberately unseen, folded into the estate's promise of permanence. Elite status relied on this concealment. The building's authority was strengthened by the illusion that it sustained itself, that such order was natural rather than managed. In this way, architecture became complicit in erasing the work required to uphold hierarchy, transforming human exertion into static beauty. What emerged was a structure that did not simply house wealth, but translated it into cultural capital. The mansion asserted that elite status could be justified aesthetically, that power expressed through beauty was less abrasive, more acceptable. Grandeur softened dominance, making it appear earned rather than imposed. At the same time, it insulated those within from the volatility beyond its walls, offering a controlled environment where uncertainty was absorbed by stone and ornament. The architecture thus functioned as both display and defense, projecting confidence outward while stabilizing it inward. In this context, architectural grandeur was never neutral. It shaped perception, guided behavior, and reinforced distinctions that might otherwise provoke resistance. By framing excess as heritage and privilege as refinement, the estate transformed inequality into something almost abstract, detached from its sources. The building stood as a silent argument that those who commanded such spaces belonged there by virtue of taste, continuity, and vision. Whether that argument persuaded or merely impressed was beside the point. Its success lay in repetition, in the way grandeur, once normalized, ceased to feel like a claim at all, and instead settled into the background as assumed order. Grandeur, however carefully constructed, is never immune to arithmetic. The estate's early years revealed a quieter counterforce to its symbolic authority, the steady accumulation of costs that elegance alone could not absorb. Maintenance on such a scale was not episodic, but constant, a recurring negotiation between vision and viability. Imported materials aged differently in Florida's climate. Gardens demanded relentless attention, and the rhythms of staffing followed, no seasonal pause. What had been designed as permanence began to behave like a living organism, consuming resources simply to remain still. Wealth could initiate magnificence, but sustaining it required a discipline that even substantial fortunes felt over time. These pressures did not announce themselves dramatically. They arrived as ledgers, assessments, and decisions deferred just long enough to complicate the next one. The estate's sheer size magnified every expense, turning small inefficiencies into meaningful liabilities. Unlike more modest properties, there was no option to scale back discreetly. Grandeur, once established, imposed its own obligations, refusing reduction without visible loss of status. Financial strain thus carried symbolic risk. Any concession threatened to puncture the illusion of effortless abundance that the architecture worked so carefully to maintain. The building's authority depended on continuity, and continuity demanded capital. Broader economic shifts intensified these internal tensions. Changes in taxation, property valuation, and the cost of skilled labor quietly altered the balance that had once made the estate manageable. What had been conceived in one financial climate now operated in another, less forgiving one. The mansion's value remained undeniable, yet its liquidity was limited. It could not easily convert prestige into flexibility. The estate became a paradox, immensely valuable, yet increasingly burdensome, admired precisely for the qualities that made it difficult to sustain. In this space, wealth revealed its fragility, not through scarcity, but through obligation. Financial challenges also exposed the limits of private stewardship. The estate's original civic aspirations, its imagined future beyond individual ownership, took on new urgency as costs mounted. Preservation, once an aesthetic concern, became an economic problem. Decisions about repairs and upgrades were no longer simply matters of taste, but of prioritization. Each intervention raised questions about return, relevance, and responsibility. The building demanded loyalty, yet offered no guarantee of solvency in return. It asked to be preserved as a symbol while resisting the compromises that preservation often requires. Invisible labor, again, played a decisive role. As financial scrutiny increased, the pressure fell disproportionately on those whose work kept the estate functional. Staffing levels fluctuated, workloads intensified, and efficiencies were extracted where they could be found. The illusion of stability was preserved through adjustment rather than acknowledgement. Guests continued to experience seamless hospitality, unaware of the recalibrations behind the scenes. In this way, financial strain did not diminish the estate's performance. It sharpened it, forcing the machinery of service to work harder to sustain the same outward calm. These economic realities began to shape the property's trajectory in subtle but lasting ways. Ownership became less about expression and more about endurance. The estate was no longer just a testament to ambition, but a test of it. Financial challenges reframed its meaning, transforming grandeur from a declaration into a question. How long could such a structure remain intact without altering its purpose or identity? The answer was never simple, because the building itself resisted simplification. Its value lay in complexity, in the accumulation of choices layered over time, each one narrowing the range of what could come next. In confronting these pressures, the estate entered a period defined less by expansion than by negotiation. The future was no longer assumed. It had to be planned, justified, and financed. What emerged was a clearer view of the cost of legacy, not just in money, but in flexibility surrendered. The mansion stood as evidence that wealth, when translated into architecture, acquires momentum of its own. It moves forward whether circumstances favor it or not, demanding adaptation from those who would claim to own it, and revealing, in moments of strain, the quiet limits of even the most carefully staged excess. The moment of transition did not arrive with ceremony, but with paperwork, negotiations, and a quiet acknowledgement that the original equilibrium could no longer hold. The estate, once governed by a single vision and sustained by a singular concentration of wealth, entered a phase where ownership became less personal and more conditional. What had been shaped around the rhythms of one household now had to accommodate different priorities, different calculations of value, and different tolerances for cost. This shift altered the mansion's relationship to itself. Rooms designed for intimacy became assets to be assessed. Land meant for continuity became leverage. The building remained physically unchanged, yet its meaning began to loosen from its original anchor. A private estate operates on faith, faith that resources will continue, that purpose is self-evident, that legacy will justify expense. Transition replaces faith with scrutiny. New ownership required the mansion to explain itself, not emotionally, but economically and symbolically. Its grandeur, once an unquestioned expression of intent, was now something to be evaluated for utility and sustainability. Decisions were filtered through feasibility rather than sentiment. The estate's vastness, previously a virtue, became a challenge to manage. Every acre, every structure, every system demanded rationale. In this recalibration, ownership shifted from stewardship to strategy. The change also reconfigured authority. Where once decisions flowed from a coherent, if idealistic, philosophy, they now emerged from negotiation, between preservation and adaptation, between reverence for the past and accommodation of the present. The mansion resisted these pressures through its material stubbornness. Stone and scale do not easily bend to reinterpretation. Yet ownership, unlike architecture, is fluid. It absorbs context, responds to external forces, and reflects the priorities of its moment. The estate became a site of compromise, its identity shaped by what could be preserved without becoming untenable. This transition altered how the estate interacted with the world beyond its gates. Privacy, once assumed, became conditional. Visibility increased, not necessarily by design, but as a consequence of new expectations placed upon the property. Ownership now implied accountability to broader audiences, financial, regulatory, and cultural. The mansion's isolation softened as it became more entangled with external systems. Roads, services, and oversight connected it more tightly to its surroundings, diminishing the sense that it existed apart from ordinary constraints. The illusion of self-containment, so carefully cultivated, grew harder to sustain. For those who worked within the estate, the transition was felt less abstractly. Invisible labor, once organized around continuity, now had to adjust to change. Roles were redefined, routines altered, and expectations recalibrated. The work remained meticulous, but its justification shifted. Maintenance was no longer an unquestioned duty to legacy. It became an operational necessity, subject to review. This subtle change carried weight. Labor that had once reinforced permanence now supported flexibility. The buildings still demanded care, but the reasons for providing it were increasingly pragmatic rather than idealistic. The estate itself absorbed these changes unevenly. Some spaces adapted easily, accommodating new uses without visible disruption. Others resisted, their design too specific to their original intent to translate seamlessly. This unevenness created a quiet tension within the structure, a dialogue between what the building had been and what it was becoming. Ownership no longer spoke in a single voice. Instead, the mansion accumulated layers of intention, each one partially obscuring the last. Legacy became something negotiated rather than inherited. Yet even in transition, the estate retained its symbolic gravity. Its presence continued to shape perception, to command attention disproportionate to its practical function. New ownership did not erase the past. It recontextualized it. The mansion became a vessel carrying multiple narratives at once. Ambition, constraint, adaptation, none fully displacing the others. In this phase, the property revealed a central truth about monumental architecture: that ownership may change hands, but the structure continues to exert influence, shaping decisions as much as it reflects them. The transition marked not an ending, but a recalibration of power, where permanence and contingency coexisted uneasily within the same walls. As national attention gathered around the mansion, its meaning began to drift away from the intentions embedded in its stone and ornament. What had once been read primarily as a private assertion of taste and continuity now entered a broader field of interpretation, shaped by audiences with no stake in its original logic. Distance altered perception. Seen from afar, the estate's architectural restraint could appear as extravagance, its cultivated privacy as opacity. The very qualities that had once signaled refinement to a limited circle were now decoded through unfamiliar lenses, each shaped by differing assumptions about wealth, authority, and belonging. This widening gaze flattened nuance. The mansion became easier to reference than to understand, more readily invoked as an image than engaged as a place. Photographs, headlines, and second-hand descriptions began to stand in for experience, compressing scale and context into symbols that could travel quickly. In this translation, complexity gave way to shorthand. The estate no longer needed to be entered to be judged. It could be assessed from a distance, its meaning inferred rather than encountered. Public perception shifted accordingly, shaped less by architecture itself than by what the building came to represent in collective imagination. Attention brought projection. Viewers read their own preoccupations into the structure, finding confirmation of broader narratives about excess, privilege, or decline. The mansion's stillness made it a convenient screen onto which anxieties could be cast. It neither argued nor explained itself. Its silence allowed interpretation to multiply. For some, it stood as an emblem of aspiration taken too far. For others, as evidence of continuity in a world increasingly defined by disruption. These readings often contradicted one another, yet all coexisted, layered over the same facade. The estate's architectural language, once carefully calibrated to suggest permanence and order, now risked appearing aloof. Grandeur that had been meant to reassure could, under national scrutiny, feel detached from ordinary experience. The illusion of effortlessness, so dependent on invisible labor, was especially vulnerable. Without proximity, maintenance looked like entitlement rather than work, stability like stagnation rather than achievement. The building's refusal to change quickly, once a virtue, became a point of friction in a culture accustomed to responsiveness. Public perception shifted not because the mansion altered its stance, but because the context around it accelerated. Media attention intensified this process by privileging narrative over material reality. The estate was increasingly discussed as an idea rather than as a constructed environment with specific histories and constraints. Its rooms and courtyards receded behind the roles assigned to it in national conversation. Architecture, which communicates slowly through experience and repetition, struggled to assert itself against faster forms of meaning-making. The mansion's physical presence remained constant, yet its symbolic weight fluctuated, pulled in different directions by cycles of attention that cared little for architectural intent. Those who encountered the estate in person often described a dissonance between expectation and reality, a reminder that buildings resist total capture by narrative. Yet these experiences rarely corrected the broader perception. National attention operates through accumulation rather than revision, layering impressions rather than refining them. Once established, a symbolic reading gains momentum, reinforced by repetition. The mansion's image became more portable than its substance, its meaning increasingly determined by circulation rather than observation. This shift carried consequences for how the estate was situated within cultural memory. It became less a site of inquiry and more a reference point, invoked to signal positions rather than invite reflection. In this role, the building's architectural subtleties, its proportions, materials, and spatial discipline, were overshadowed by the debates it seemed to host by proxy. Public perception narrowed even as attention expanded, a paradox that left little room for ambivalence. The mansion was asked to stand for something definitive, even as its history resisted such clarity. Yet the structure endured this reframing with the same composure it brought to earlier phases of its life. Stone does not respond to opinion, and scale does not argue back. The estate's capacity to absorb interpretation without visible reaction only deepened its ambiguity. As national attention continued to reshape its image, the mansion revealed an enduring truth about monumental architecture, that once it enters the public imagination, it no longer belongs solely to its makers or owners. It becomes a shared object of interpretation, its meaning negotiated in the space between material reality and collective perception, where illusion and legacy are constantly rewritten. Visibility altered the mansion not through renovation, but through use. As its doors opened more frequently and to a broader spectrum of guests, the estate began to function less as a secluded environment and more as a public-facing stage. The architecture, once oriented toward privacy and controlled access, adapted to the rhythms of display. Spaces designed for selective gatherings now accommodated recurring events, their proportions lending themselves to spectacle as easily as they once had to discretion. What changed was not the structure itself, but the density of attention passing through it. Repetition replaced rarity, and familiarity gradually softened the sense of remove that had defined the estate's earlier social life. This transformation depended on predictability. A visible social venue must offer consistency, of experience, of atmosphere, of promise. The mansion's aesthetic stability made this possible. Its interiors absorbed changing crowds without losing coherence, allowing each event to feel both unique and interchangeable. Grandeur functioned as a backdrop rather than a focal point, framing social interaction while remaining conspicuously present. The estate no longer suggested exclusivity through absence, but through controlled abundance. Access was broadened, yet still mediated, reinforcing the impression that inclusion was granted rather than assumed. With increased visibility came a recalibration of performance. Guests did not merely occupy the space, they were seen occupying it. The mansion's courtyards, terraces, and halls became settings for recognition, places where presence itself carried meaning. Architecture amplified this effect by offering clear lines of sight and ceremonial routes of movement. Arrival and departure gained theatrical weight, turning routine gestures into moments of display. The estate's design, long practiced in shaping perception, proved well suited to this role. It did not resist becoming a venue. It refined it. Behind this outward ease, the demands on labor intensified. A highly visible social environment tolerates little friction. Service had to be precise, timing exact, transitions seamless. The work required to maintain this appearance multiplied as events became more frequent. Floors were polished repeatedly, furnishings reset, gardens restored overnight. This labor remained largely unseen, absorbed into the expectation of continuity. The more visible the estate became, the more invisible the work sustaining it had to be. Illusion depended on concealment, and concealment required discipline. The mansion's growing role as a social venue also altered its relationship to time. Events created cycles, anticipation, occurrence, aftermath, that structured the estate's life more rigidly than before. Instead of long intervals of quiet punctuated by select gatherings, the calendar filled. The building was no longer waiting to be activated. It was perpetually in use. This constant readiness changed the tone of the space. Rooms that once held the residue of past conversations now reset quickly, carrying less memory and more function. The estate began to privilege presence over permanence, experience over accumulation. Visibility also invited comparison. As images circulated and stories accumulated, the mansion entered a broader ecosystem of social venues, judged alongside others rather than apart from them. Its distinction relied increasingly on scale and setting rather than mystery. What once felt singular now had to assert itself repeatedly to remain so. This required careful management of perception, ensuring that each public moment reinforced the estate's reputation rather than diluted it. The architecture bore this pressure with composure, offering a stable frame for an evolving performance. In becoming a highly visible social venue, the mansion did not abandon its symbolic weight. It redistributed it, meaning shifted from possession to participation, from who owned the space to who moved through it. The estate's authority was no longer quiet, but ambient, sustained by repetition and recognition rather than distance. Yet the building retained its capacity for ambiguity. Beneath the surface of social energy, its scale and stillness continued to suggest endurance beyond any single gathering. The transformation revealed a subtle truth: that visibility does not necessarily diminish power, but changes how it is exercised, less through isolation, more through presence, and always through the careful maintenance of illusion. As the mansion's presence became more pronounced, it began to accrue a layer of significance that extended far beyond its walls, entering the often opaque interplay between wealth and political influence. The estate, long celebrated for its architectural splendor and its capacity to host society's upper echelons, gradually assumed a new role as a locus where visibility translated into leverage. The gatherings held within its ornate halls, the meticulously staged dinners, and the ceremonious receptions carried with them a quiet, almost imperceptible weight. The assertion that proximity to the space itself conferred access to its occupants' power. Architecture, in this sense, became an instrument of authority. Its scale, its lavish detailing, and its deliberate spatial arrangements signaled not only luxury, but a capacity for influence, a tangible manifestation of social hierarchy rendered into stone, timber, and ornamentation. In the context of American society, where symbolic capital often intertwines with political capital, the mansion functioned as a stage upon which both could be displayed. Every room, corridor, and terrace became a theater of diplomacy and social signaling. Conversations that might have unfolded elsewhere in private were intensified by the estate's gravity, framed by chandeliers, frescoed ceilings, and marble floors that seemed to amplify the significance of every handshake, every exchange of deference. The architectural choices, grandiose entryways, long corridors that led inevitably to prominent gathering spaces, were more than aesthetic flourishes. They orchestrated encounters, guiding the rhythm and pace of interaction in ways that reinforced status and authority. Guests were subtly reminded, with every step, of the hierarchy embedded in the space, an unspoken choreography of power that positioned them as witnesses to and participants in a subtle assertion of control. Yet the mansion's association with political influence was never static. It evolved alongside the ambitions and decisions of those who inhabited it. Its social visibility made it a natural magnet for attention from political figures, lobbyists, and commentators, all drawn to the spectacle of wealth as a proxy for capability. The estate's presence in the public imagination created a feedback loop. Visibility conferred influence. Influence attracted visibility, and the mansion's symbolic potency grew in tandem. Even the building's materiality contributed to this dynamic. Its gilded surfaces, sweeping staircases, and elaborate facades provided a visual lexicon of permanence and authority, suggesting that those who moved through its spaces were, by extension, connected to enduring structures of power. This association was amplified by media and reportage, which transformed the private into a form of semi-public performance. The mansion became a lens through which political and social influence could be measured and interpreted. Images of gatherings, portraits taken within its halls, and accounts of events circulated widely, reinforcing the notion that proximity to the estate equated to proximity to decision-making and sway. The architecture, once simply a backdrop for elite leisure, now carried the burden of representation. Its ornamental richness and spatial hierarchy were not merely decorative but performative, each element contributing to a narrative in which power was both displayed and distilled, in which wealth became inseparable from its capacity to impress and to command attention. The mansion's embodiment of influence also relied on a subtle interplay between openness and restriction. While events made the estate accessible in moments, the vastness and selectivity of the spaces themselves imposed boundaries. Access was mediated, calculated, and consequential. This duality, the simultaneous visibility and exclusivity, heightened the perception of power, underscoring that influence was not just about presence, but about control over who could witness and who could participate. In this way, the architecture itself became a silent partner in political theater, structuring encounters, shaping perception, and reinforcing the intangible yet palpable hierarchy that defined the mansion's contemporary significance. Over time, Mar-a-Lago's image as a symbol of influence crystallized into a broader cultural understanding, linking its opulent interiors and sprawling grounds to the exercise of authority at multiple scales, from local sway to national consequence. The estate, though a private residence, transcended its domestic function, entering a space where architecture, social performance, and political symbolism intersected. Its halls echoed not only with conversation but with implication, the arrangement of space, the scale of its rooms, and the choreography of its gatherings collectively narrating a story in which power, visibility, and wealth were inseparable. The mansion's legacy in this regard lies not in any single policy or decision, but in the way its very presence reshaped perception, rendering architecture an active participant in the intricate and often invisible networks of influence that define the corridors of American power. Controversy, subtle at first, gradually became inseparable from the mansion's identity, emerging not simply from its opulence, but from the symbolic weight it carried in an era where wealth, visibility, and political entanglement were increasingly scrutinized. Certain events, both public and semi-private, crystallized this tension, drawing attention to the contradictions embedded. Within the estate itself, a space designed for leisure and display, now operating as a stage where influence, perception, and morality intersected in ways that could provoke admiration, envy, and suspicion all at once. Each gathering, each photographed encounter, seemed to invite judgment, not only of the individuals present, but of the architectural theater that framed them, a structure that itself had become an agent of interpretation. The mansion's aesthetic, once a testament to artistry and elite aspiration, was now inseparable from the narratives projected onto it, the lines between private indulgence and public spectacle blurring until the building's stones seemed to carry the weight of social commentary. As media coverage intensified, incidents that might have once been considered personal or localized were amplified into national conversations, highlighting the mansion's symbolic potency. Its grandeur, the sprawling lawns, the gold-leafed ceilings, and the grand ballrooms became backdrops for scrutiny, and the visibility of its occupants transformed ordinary events into matters of public fascination. Reporters, commentators, and historians alike noted the tension between the estate's ostentatious charm and the political resonance it carried, observing how a structure initially conceived as a sanctuary for elite leisure could be read as a statement of influence, a claim to authority, or even a subtle provocation. Architectural choices, the imposing entryways, the ceremonial staircases, the meticulously curated gardens, suddenly acquired a dual meaning. Not merely symbols of status and taste, but instruments through which controversy could be magnified, the scale of wealth itself becoming a matter of debate and speculation. Certain high-profile gatherings, where decisions were discussed, alliances hinted at, or affiliations showcased, brought the mansion to the forefront of public consciousness in ways that transformed its perception overnight. Even in moments that were ostensibly social, the building's architecture orchestrated the circulation of people and attention, shaping encounters so that they resonated beyond the confines of its walls. The interplay of openness and exclusivity, the invitation extended to a select few while the broader public remained excluded, fueled both intrigue and criticism, reinforcing the mansion's role as a focal point where privilege was both displayed and contested. Each staircase, each corridor, each terrace functioned as part of an elaborate choreography, emphasizing that in a space of such grandeur, the act of moving through it could itself be laden with symbolic consequence. Moreover, the mansion's visibility coincided with a broader cultural and political moment in which the scrutiny of elite spaces had intensified. Journalists and historians trace connections between the architecture and the occupants' social and political choices, noting that Mar-a-Lago was no mere house, but a vessel through which influence, wealth, and ideology intersected. Allegations, critiques, and public discourse often focused less on the minutiae of events than on the mansion as an emblem, a lens through which power and propriety were measured, debated, and at times condemned. Its walls, with their intricate carvings and gilded finishes, seemed almost to reflect the paradox of visibility. The more they were admired for craftsmanship, the more they attracted moral and political attention, each decorative flourish imbued with meaning that extended beyond design into social judgment. Controversy was thus not a single moment, but a cumulative effect, built over time by the interaction between architectural spectacle, public fascination, and the unpredictable currents of human perception. The mansion scale made every event an occasion, every guest a potential signal, and every photograph a statement interpreted in the court of public opinion. Its spaces, designed for celebration and display, became mirrors reflecting society's anxieties about wealth, influence, and access. In this way, the building itself assumed a complex agency, serving as both stage and actor, simultaneously admired and contested, its opulence inseparable from the debates it inspired. The estate's identity, once tied solely to social prestige, evolved into a focal point where admiration, suspicion, and moral scrutiny converged, producing a legacy of controversy that would shadow the mansion for decades, shaping how it would be remembered, interpreted, and experienced by both those who entered its halls and those who observed from afar. As the mansion emerged into national consciousness, the lens of media attention reshaped not only its public image, but the very narratives that defined it, transforming a private estate into a site of persistent observation and interpretation. Photographs of its gilded interiors, sprawling gardens, and imposing facades circulated widely, each image a carefully composed tableau that invited speculation as much as admiration. Journalists and commentators, attuned to the interplay between wealth, visibility, and influence, began to frame Mar-a-Lago not simply as a residence, but as a symbol through which broader questions of social hierarchy, power, and taste could be explored. Stories of lavish parties, celebrity visits, and high-profile gatherings proliferated, often emphasizing the tension between public fascination and private indulgence, revealing how architecture itself could become a vessel for societal judgment, a silent participant in the unfolding drama of status and ambition. The estate's physical grandeur provided a canvas upon which media narratives could project both aspiration and critique, its arches and halls becoming metaphors for access, exclusivity, and the human appetite for spectacle. With each successive article and broadcast, the mansion accrued layers of meaning beyond its original intent. Early portrayals often celebrated the audacity of its design, the elegance of its craftsmanship, and the vision of its creators. Yet even in admiration, there was a subtle acknowledgement of excess, a recognition that such monumental displays of wealth carried implicit social and cultural consequences. As coverage broadened, journalists began to juxtapose the splendor within its walls against the surrounding social and political contexts, inviting audiences to consider the contradictions inherent in concentrated affluence. Editorials and features frequently foreground the contrast between architectural mastery and moral inquiry, suggesting that Mar-a-Lago, in its scale and visibility, was inseparable from the questions it raised about privilege, influence, and the boundaries between private ambition and public scrutiny. The evolution of these narratives was neither linear nor uniform. Each story built upon, reframed, or contested the ones that came before. What was initially perceived as an opulent social venue became, over time, a locus of debate, where interpretations range from admiration for its artistic and architectural achievements to critique of the social hierarchies it embodied. The mansion's reputation oscillated with events, media cycles, and shifts in public sentiment, demonstrating the fluidity of meaning when private space enters the public sphere. Photographs of banquets, ceremonial entrances, and landscape terraces were dissected for symbolic import, transforming mundane or celebratory moments into data points in a broader cultural conversation about wealth, influence, and visibility. The building's physical presence, its scale, ornamentation, and spatial arrangements, functioned as a silent argument, suggesting privilege and aspiration in ways that could be easily translated into headlines, features, or analytical essays. As journalists navigated the mansion's social and political entanglements, the narratives became increasingly complex, often blending architecture, biography, and cultural observation. Every chandelier, marble column, and carved relief could be read as evidence of taste, excess, or strategy. Every terrace and garden path suggested a choreography of social interaction designed to reinforce status and influence. Coverage of Mar-a-Lago evolved into a sophisticated commentary on the interplay between space and power, with writers interpreting its rooms and corridors not merely as settings, but as active participants in the performance of identity and authority. The mansion's evolution in the media mirrored, in many ways, its architectural intent. The creation of spaces that commanded attention, directed movement, and shaped perception. Yet unlike its original owners, the media's gaze was relentless, adaptive, and capable of producing enduring narratives that could reframe history, challenge assumptions, and redefine the mansion's place in collective consciousness. Through this lens, Mar-a-Lago became more than stone and stucco. It became a story, a symbol, and a site where architecture and public discourse intertwined, revealing the subtle, persistent power of observation to shape the legacy of place. As Mar-a-Lago's prominence grew, it became not merely a residence or social venue, but a site where architecture intersected with law, governance, and ethical scrutiny, a space whose very walls seemed to reflect the tensions between private rights and public responsibility. Questions of legal designation emerged almost immediately, with debates over zoning, property tax exemptions, and the implications of its status as a private club, raising intricate, often obscure, issues that extended far beyond local planning offices. The mansion's dual identity, as a historic estate and a commercialized social hub, created an uneasy alignment of interests, where regulations designed to preserve public welfare were tested against the prerogatives of wealth and influence. Scholars, journalists, and local officials noted that Mar-a-Lago occupied a liminal space, one where the symbolic weight of grandeur intersected with the technicalities of law, producing ambiguities that invited contestation and, at times, outright dispute. Its sprawling footprint, its highly visible gatherings, and its association with influential figures amplified the stakes of these questions, rendering otherwise arcane regulations suddenly significant in the public imagination. The ethical dimensions were no less complicated. The mansion's visibility and social magnetism made it a conduit for influence, raising questions about the responsibilities of ownership and the potential for conflicts of interest. Critics observed that the concentration of wealth, access, and opportunity within such spaces could foster environments in which the line between personal privilege and public power became blurred, leaving observers to ponder the broader consequences for governance, society, and the principles of fairness. Every function hosted within its halls, be it a formal gathering, a private celebration, or an ostensibly social event, carried with it an ethical weight, as the consequences of access and exclusion extended beyond mere attendance. Architectural spaces, in this context, were not neutral. The design and scale of Mar-a-Lago amplified the visibility of its occupants, and through them, the ethical questions that accompanied immense concentration of social and political capital. Legal and ethical concerns intertwined in ways that were sometimes subtle, sometimes stark, The debate over Mar-a-Lago's tax exemptions and municipal obligations, for instance, was inseparable from broader discussions of influence and transparency, illustrating how architecture could serve as both a physical and conceptual stage for the exercise of power. Law, in this context, was not only a set of rules to be followed, but a narrative lens through which the public interpreted the propriety of wealth and privilege. Scholars and commentators emphasized that architecture could function as a mirror to societal values, reflecting how communities negotiate the boundaries between private ambition and collective accountability. In such spaces, the act of inhabiting, hosting, and maintaining a property like Mar-a-Lago became a moral performance as much as a practical one, each choice resonating with potential implications far beyond the immediate sphere of its walls. The mansion's scale and opulence magnified these tensions. Its visibility ensured that every decision regarding its use, access, and legal status was subject to scrutiny, rendering private discretion into public debate. The ethical implications of such scrutiny were compounded by the mansion's proximity to national power, as observers speculated on the ways in which social spaces could shape policy, perception, and authority. Legal frameworks, while detailed and prescriptive, were continually tested against novel circumstances, revealing gaps, ambiguities, and conflicts between historical precedent and contemporary expectations. Through this lens, Mar-a-Lago became a case study in the interaction between architecture and governance, a tangible manifestation of the dilemmas that emerge when spaces of immense wealth intersect with societal oversight. Its halls, terraces, and corridors thus served as both literal and symbolic stages, hosting not only the rituals of privilege, but also the ongoing negotiation between legality, ethics, and the enduring consequences of concentrated influence, where every architectural detail carried a silent testimony to questions that extend far beyond the physical estate itself. The growing prominence of Mar-a-Lago inevitably attracted heightened attention, not all of it benign, and with visibility came a set of security challenges that would shape its identity as much as its architecture. The mansion's sprawling grounds, extensive terraces, and open access points, originally conceived to impress and welcome, now became points of vulnerability, where the very openness that conveyed grandeur demanded unprecedented oversight. Security, in this context, was not a matter of simple fences or guards. It became an intricate choreography of surveillance, access control, and risk assessment, a silent layer of labor and planning that rarely entered the public imagination but was integral to the estate's functioning. Architects and security consultants alike confronted the tension between maintaining the mansion's aesthetic and accommodating the invisible mechanisms that would safeguard its occupants, a delicate balance between allure and impenetrability. Every staircase, hallway, and entryway had to serve dual purposes, to convey opulence and status while resisting intrusion, a physical testament to the paradoxical demands of wealth and exposure. The mansion's notoriety further intensified these pressures, as its social and political associations made it a locus of attention for media, protest, and occasional threat. Security concerns were amplified not only by the number of visitors and high-profile guests, but also by the symbolic weight the estate carried, transforming it into a stage where perception and vulnerability intertwined. Observers noted that Mar-a-Lago was not simply a residence. It had become a performative space where power, wealth, and danger were inseparably bound. Security measures, from fortified perimeters to concealed monitoring systems, were a testament to the invisible labor required to sustain a setting that was otherwise devoted to leisure, ceremony, and display. The mansion's architecture, celebrated for openness and elegance, was now layered with an unseen infrastructure of control, where every design choice, materials, sight lines, lighting, was informed by the need to anticipate both ordinary and extraordinary risks. The interplay between notoriety and security extended beyond the practical into the symbolic, as the presence of armed personnel, restricted zones, and surveillance subtly reframed the mansion's narrative. Its visual and social accessibility was tempered by an undercurrent of caution, a reminder that visibility itself could provoke both admiration and vulnerability. Analysts of architecture and power observed that such tensions were emblematic of estates of immense prominence. Spaces designed to project confidence and permanence were simultaneously sites of constant negotiation with contingency, where the very magnitude of influence invited scrutiny, challenge, and, occasionally, danger. Mar-a-Lago's terraces and grand halls, which had long functioned as stages for social and political performance, now carried the silent testimony of these protective measures. Each patrol route and checkpoint an invisible yet essential participant in the estate's ongoing story. In practical terms, security shaped both daily life and perception, influencing not only how the mansion could be used, but how it was perceived by the broader public. Every decision regarding access, event planning, and guest movement was filtered through a lens of precaution, a constant reminder that wealth and prominence carry obligations that are often invisible yet intensely consequential. For historians and observers, this invisible labor became a key to understanding the mansion's layered identity, a site where architectural elegance, social ritual, political association, and the imperatives of safety coexist in delicate equilibrium. The very measures designed to protect Mar-a-Lago paradoxically enhanced its mystique and notoriety, rendering it a place where power and visibility were inseparable from the vigilant, silent work required to maintain them, a living illustration of the burdens that accompany monumental prominence and the inescapable attention it commands. As Mar-a-Lago's prominence grew, so too did the intensity and diversity of public reaction, a mirror reflecting the deep fissures of perception, expectation, and critique that accompany symbols of conspicuous wealth. For some, the mansion embodied aspiration incarnate, a tangible manifestation of ambition and success, where gilded walls and sweeping terraces suggested mastery over both space and circumstance. Visitors and commentators alike noted the deliberate theatricality of its design. The way a vaulted ceiling or a marble staircase could evoke awe, how ornamentation and scale were choreographed to impress. Yet admiration existed uneasily alongside critique, as the very opulence that drew fascination also provoked skepticism, inviting questions about the source of wealth, the social cost of extravagance, and the inequality inherent in such monumental display. Mar-a-Lago became a canvas upon which broader anxieties about power, privilege, and visibility were projected, its architecture serving as both setting and symbol for a complex dialogue between reverence and reproach. Media coverage amplified these reactions, framing the mansion alternately as a palace of excess and a stage for influence, often highlighting the contrast between its beauty and the social realities it represented. Public perception was mediated through photographs of glittering ballrooms, aerial views of manicured grounds, and accounts of lavish events that seemed to operate in a sphere apart from ordinary life. Each image, each report, carried with it an implicit narrative. Mar-a-Lago was at once an object of desire and a target of scrutiny. Commentary ranged from admiring analyses of craftsmanship and design to sharp critiques that questioned the morality of such conspicuous accumulation, revealing the duality of attention that estates of immense wealth inevitably provoke. The mansion's aesthetic and social presence thus became inseparable from the discourse surrounding it, each reflection of light off its windows a metaphor for the multiple interpretations it invited. These public reactions were neither static nor uniform. They shifted in intensity and tone with the mansion's evolving role in society, responding to events, political associations, and broader cultural conversations. Local residents, national observers, and international audiences each interpreted its presence through distinct lenses, blending curiosity, envy, critique, and fascination. In this interplay, Mar-a-Lago's identity was co-constructed by both those who walked its corridors and those who viewed it from afar, the mansion becoming a node in a network of perception where physical space and social meaning were inseparable. Popular imagination transformed hallways and gardens into symbols. Each ornate room suggested influence, each terrace hinted at surveillance, and the very scale of the property became a silent commentary on ambition and excess. Public attention, in this sense, acted as an invisible architect, shaping not walls and ceilings, but the mansion's symbolic weight in the collective consciousness. The polarizing effect of these reactions was further intensified by the mansion's association with social stratification and elite networks. Discussions about accessibility, membership, and exclusivity emphasize contrast between inclusion and exclusion, creating narratives of privilege that were both tangible in physical layout and abstract in cultural meaning. As a result, Mar-a-Lago became a site where admiration and criticism were tightly interwoven. The same elements that inspired wonder, grand staircases, frescoed ceilings, and expansive ballrooms, also provoked debate about moral responsibility, societal priorities, and the consequences of concentrated wealth. The mansion's architecture, in its grandeur, became a stage upon which these tensions played out, a silent yet eloquent testament to the power of space to reflect and shape public perception. In the end, the estate's polarizing image was not merely a product of external commentary, but of the complex dialogue between the tangible allure of its construction and the intangible narratives that enveloped it, each reinforcing the other in a cycle that ensured Mar-a-Lago's enduring presence in the cultural imagination. Over the decades, Mar-a-Lago evolved from a private estate into a potent symbol whose significance extended far beyond its physical presence, becoming a repository of cultural meaning layered with aspiration, notoriety, and contested ideals. Its architecture, deliberately theatrical and meticulously detailed, was read not merely as a demonstration of wealth, but as a language of status, a vocabulary through which notions of success, exclusivity, and social hierarchy were articulated. Marble columns, gilded moldings, and sweeping terraces came to signify more than craftsmanship. They became markers of a lifestyle and a worldview, suggesting a society in which access and influence were measured as much by proximity to such spaces as by the decisions made within them. Each decorative motif, from ornate frescoes to imported stone, was a deliberate gesture, a cultural punctuation that signaled refinement, taste, and the assertion of authority through aesthetic experience. As Mar-a-Lago entered the broader national consciousness, its symbolic weight expanded and shifted, reflecting the values, fears, and ambitions of those who observed it. To some, it epitomized the American dream realized in its most extravagant form, a tangible proof that vision and capital could transmute imagination into monumental reality. To others, it became a cautionary emblem, a reminder of inequality and excess, with a visual language of power underscored social divisions and moral ambiguities. Cultural narratives intertwined with its walls, with the mansion functioning as a mirror in which societal aspirations and anxieties were refracted. The estate's role as a gathering place for elites only deepened this symbolism, turning the physical space into a stage where questions of influence, privilege, and cultural authority played out silently yet unmistakably. Media representation further magnified Mar-a-Lago's symbolic resonance, framing it through images and stories that highlighted both its allure and its contradictions. Photographs capturing sunlit terraces or glittering ballrooms were circulated alongside commentary about political connections, lavish expenditures, and social exclusivity, merging aesthetic admiration with moral and civic debate. In this interplay, the mansion became a cultural icon not simply because of its architecture, but because it embodied tensions between visibility and privacy, ambition and responsibility, celebration and critique. The estate's physical presence acted as a canvas onto which broader narratives were projected, its walls and gardens serving as silent witnesses to a nation's fascination with wealth, spectacle, and authority, each observer reading meaning into its design according to their own expectations and values. Over time, Mar-a-Lago's cultural symbolism also absorbed historical context, its image accruing layers of interpretation tied to shifts in politics, social norms, and economic discourse. The estate was no longer simply a residence. It became a lens through which American society examined itself, negotiating ideas of luxury, influence, and morality. Ceremonial spaces and private quarters alike were transformed into signifiers, encoding narratives of power and ambition that transcended the literal functions of rooms and halls. In this sense, the mansion operated simultaneously as an artifact and an allegory, a structure whose materiality was inseparable from the intangible meanings it had come to embody. The gardens, the ballrooms, and the grand facades spoke silently of continuity and transformation, asserting that architecture, when intertwined with wealth and public visibility, inevitably accrues symbolic significance that echoes far beyond the intentions of its creators. Mar-a-Lago, through its very presence, thus crystallized a cultural dialogue, a monument not only to personal vision and social ambition, but to the ever-shifting values and preoccupations of a society grappling with the allure and consequences of concentrated power. From a moment Mar-a-Lago became visible to a national audience, it polarized perception, drawing a sharp line between those who celebrated it as an emblem of aspiration and those who condemned it as a monument to excess. Supporters viewed the estate through a lens of admiration, seeing in its soaring ceilings, imported marble, and meticulously curated gardens the realization of ambition materialized, a physical testament to success, ingenuity, and the capacity to shape space according to personal vision. To them, Mar-a-Lago was a stage for social and cultural refinement, a place where grandeur and ceremony could coexist with hospitality, and where access signified not merely wealth but discernment, taste, and social legitimacy. The meticulous restoration of its interiors, the precision of landscaping, and the preservation of historical motifs were interpreted as a commitment to legacy, an effort to maintain an environment where history and opulence conversed in deliberate harmony. Yet for critics, the same features carried a starkly different resonance. They saw in the mansion an excessive concentration of privilege, an architectural articulation of inequality that transformed personal wealth into a public spectacle. Every gilded ornament and sprawling terrace was read not as artistic accomplishment, but as a marker of social disparity, a physical manifestation of a system that enabled some to consolidate influence while others were excluded from even witnessing such spaces. In this reading, the mansion became a symbol of moral tension, where aesthetic achievement was inseparable from questions of fairness, civic responsibility, and the cultural costs of ostentation. Critics framed it as a stage where power was not only displayed but reinforced, its scale and visibility reinforcing the sense that wealth could be wielded in ways that were both alluring and troubling, inspiring fascination while provoking unease. This divide was further amplified by the narratives surrounding the estate's owners and the events that unfolded within its walls. Supporters often emphasized continuity, tradition, and the curatorial vision that underpinned its design, highlighting the social, charitable, and cultural functions that could coexist with prestige. For detractors, those same events underscored secrecy, influence, and potential conflicts of interest, casting the mansion as an arena where societal and political norms were both observed and tested, and where visibility intensified scrutiny. The physicality of the estate, its isolated beachfront, fortified entryways, and extensive staff, served as a tangible reflection of this dichotomy, embodying both the allure of exclusivity and the anxiety of separation, a structure that could inspire admiration for its craftsmanship while simultaneously symbolizing detachment from the everyday realities of the broader public. In the public imagination, Mar-a-Lago became a canvas upon which social and political narratives were projected, each observer reading meaning into its spaces according to perspective and experience. The mansion's vastness allowed it to occupy multiple roles at once: a private retreat, a social forum, a symbol of aspiration, and a locus of controversy. Supporters and critics alike acknowledged its undeniable visual and cultural impact, yet the interpretations diverged sharply, crystallizing broader debates about wealth, access, and the symbolic power of architecture. The estate's capacity to polarize opinion thus mirrored its own design, deliberate, striking, and impossible to overlook, with spaces constructed to impress and dominate, yet leaving each viewer to negotiate their own ethical and emotional response. In this divide, the mansion's true legacy took shape, not solely in stone, marble, or gilding, but in the intangible, enduring conversation it provoked, a silent dialogue that continues to ripple through public consciousness, reflecting the tensions and contradictions of a society enthralled by both beauty and power. As Mar-a-Lago assumed a more prominent position in the national imagination, it transcended its identity as a mere estate and emerged as a focal point for debates that extended far beyond architecture, wealth, or social prestige. The mansion became a lens through which questions of governance, influence, and societal values were refracted, its walls and gates serving as a stage on which larger narratives about power were performed and contested. For some observers, it represented the tangible intersection of private ambition and public consequence, a space where the accumulation of wealth could intersect with political reach, and where the decisions made behind closed doors carried implications that reverberated far beyond the estate's manicured lawns. The very visibility of the property intensified these perceptions, as each event, each gathering, each statement issued from within its boundaries was magnified by the media and absorbed into the broader discourse, transforming architectural form into a symbol of contested authority. In the eyes of critics, the mansion's prominence exposed tensions inherent in a society that venerates personal achievement while remaining wary of concentrated influence. Mar-a-Lago became shorthand for debates over privilege, access, and the subtle ways that social and political networks could reinforce one another. Its opulent design and historical references amplified these discussions, suggesting that the accumulation of cultural capital and aesthetic refinement was inseparable from the assertion of social and political power. Every marble column, ornate chandelier, and sweeping staircase was read not simply as craftsmanship, but as a statement of intent, a reminder that architecture could function simultaneously as art, habitat, and instrument of persuasion. Observers noted that such spaces, though physically confined, projected influence outward, shaping perceptions and expectations across a much wider cultural landscape. Supporters, conversely, framed the estate as a site of tradition and continuity, where ceremony and hospitality could coexist with ambition and enterprise. They emphasized its capacity to host social and diplomatic gatherings, presenting it as a venue that, while exclusive, fulfilled functions of connection, negotiation, and cultural exchange. Within this perspective, Mar-a-Lago's visibility was not inherently problematic. Rather, it reflected the natural consequence of prominence, where scale and distinction inevitably attract attention. The mansion's architectural narrative, its fusion of Mediterranean motifs, classical references, and idiosyncratic touches, was interpreted as evidence of intentionality, an effort to craft a space that communicated both aesthetic discernment and social authority. Yet, even within these divergent readings, the estate's role as a flashpoint was undeniable. Every renovation, policy decision, or public event hosted within its walls became imbued with symbolic weight, carrying the potential to ignite discussion far beyond Palm Beach. The mansion's history, its prior ownership, and the symbolic resonance of its spaces were repeatedly invoked in debates over ethics, propriety, and the boundaries between private property and public consequence. In this sense, Mar-a-Lago operated as both catalyst and canvas, its physical and cultural presence amplifying tensions that might otherwise have remained abstract. Its very architecture, grandiose, visible, and meticulously curated, rendered the estate inseparable from the narratives projected upon it, making it a constant reference point for arguments about transparency, privilege, and the interplay between social spectacle and political influence. By becoming a flashpoint, the mansion illuminated broader patterns within American society. The fascination with symbols of wealth, the scrutiny applied to concentrated power, and the enduring question of how private spaces can wield public significance. The estate's physicality, its isolation, fortification, and theatricality. Both invited attention and provoked scrutiny, emphasizing the tension between allure and apprehension, admiration and critique. In this heightened visibility, Mar-a-Lago became more than a property. It became a cultural artifact whose significance was perpetually negotiated, contested, and redefined, an enduring emblem of how architecture, social ambition, and political perception can converge to shape discourse on a national scale. The mansion's presence, simultaneously admired and criticized, embodied the friction between aspiration and accountability, offering a vivid reminder that in the interplay of space and society, every structure tells stories far larger than its walls might suggest. Mar-a-Lago stands not merely as a physical structure, but as a prism through which contemporary ideas of luxury and power have been refracted, its very presence influencing perceptions of what affluence can signify in modern society. The mansion's soaring ceilings, gilded interiors, and expansive grounds articulate a language of excess that is both visual and symbolic, translating material abundance into a performance of authority. In the decades since its construction, the estate has become shorthand for an aspirational yet contested ideal. That true power is inseparable from visibility, that wealth is not only measured in accumulation, but in the ability to craft spaces that command attention, that influence often travels hand in hand with aesthetic display. Visitors, observers, and cultural commentators alike have long recognized that Mar-a-Lago functions as more than a residence. It is a stage upon which status is dramatized, and on which the rituals of elite society are made manifest in ways both overt and subtle. The mansion's architecture, its ornate plasterwork, its imported stone, its meticulously landscaped terraces, communicates a message that is at once deliberate and unconscious. That grandeur and authority are inseparable from one another, and that the perception of power is cultivated as carefully as the structure itself. This influence extends beyond the visual to the social, shaping how wealth is performed and recognized in public consciousness. Mar-a-Lago's very layout, the juxtaposition of private chambers with vast entertaining spaces, the ceremonial staircases and formal ballrooms, dictates how occupants move through and interact with their environment, reinforcing hierarchies and establishing a choreography of prestige. Those who walk its halls participate in an implicit narrative, where proximity to the mansion's centerpiece spaces signals status, and where the architecture itself becomes a tool of social calibration. The estate exemplifies the idea that luxury is not merely the possession of expensive objects, but the orchestration of experiences and the structuring of relationships through environment, a lesson that has echoed through subsequent generations of architectural design for private estates and corporate headquarters alike. At the same time, Mar-a-Lago's prominence has imbued the concept of luxury with moral and cultural complexity. While the mansion's opulence is often admired for its craftsmanship and historical resonance, it simultaneously invites critique regarding excess, inequality, and the visibility of private wealth in a public landscape. Its gilded surfaces and elaborate facades serve as both aspiration and provocation, a reminder that the allure of grandeur can coexist uneasily with broader societal scrutiny. In this tension, the mansion has helped to define a particular modern ethos. That power is most compelling when it is both tangible and performative, when it is legible through space, material, and ritual. It demonstrates how architecture can codify status, translating personal ambition into a narrative accessible to the wider world, and how a single property can come to embody the fantasies, anxieties, and moral ambiguities associated with contemporary notions of success. The mansion's influence is also cultural, shaping media portrayals of affluence and reinforcing a visual vocabulary for opulence that extends into film, photography, and journalism. Its imagery, sunlight glinting off marble floors, chandeliers dripping crystal into vast halls, terraces overlooking manicured gardens, has become emblematic of the elite domestic ideal, a reference point against which other expressions of wealth are measured. By mediating both private experience and public perception, Mar-a-Lago has helped to codify a particular understanding of luxury, one in which scale, ornamentation, and visibility are inseparable from authority, and in which the architecture itself narrates the ambitions of those who inhabit it. The estate thus operates as both symbol and instrument, shaping contemporary imagination about the relationship between space, status, and influence, demonstrating that in the modern world, power is as much performed as it is possessed, and that the environment in which it is exercised communicates as much as the actions themselves. Ultimately, Mar-a-Lago's significance lies in its dual capacity to inspire admiration and provoke reflection, a physical embodiment of the aspirational allure and ethical complexity of modern wealth. Its walls, gardens, and grand halls are not merely spaces for living or entertaining. They are instruments through which contemporary society negotiates its understanding of luxury, success, and authority. By occupying this liminal space between spectacle and function, the mansion has shaped how power is visualized, codified, and understood, establishing a template for the performative dimensions of affluence that continues to influence perceptions of status in the 21st century. Its legacy, therefore, is less about the minutiae of ownership or the precise tally of treasures within, and more about the enduring power of architecture to define, narrate, and project an ideal of prominence that resonates far beyond the estate itself. Mar-a-Lago's presence in public consciousness has never been static. It has persisted as a locus of fascination, debate, and contention, sustained by controversies that unfold in layers as intricate as its architectural detailing. Each incident, whether financial, legal, or social, intersects with the estate's material grandeur, reinforcing the sense that the mansion is more than a residence. It is a living stage upon which the negotiations of power, wealth, and influence are played out for national and international audiences alike. Its gilded interiors and expansive terraces, originally conceived as spaces for refined leisure and elite gatherings, now serve as the backdrop for narratives that range from scrutiny of private conduct to discussions about the very nature of privilege in modern society. In this way, Mar-a-Lago embodies a paradox. It is at once an object of admiration and a catalyst for critical reflection, a symbol of aspiration and a repository for societal unease. The ongoing controversies surrounding the estate are amplified by its visibility and accessibility to media interpretation, transforming everyday operations, renovations, and social events into material for public debate. Journalists, commentators, and cultural observers often parse its architecture, its security apparatus, and its ceremonial spaces for clues about influence, authority, and the broader implications of wealth in public life. In this context, Mar-a-Lago's aesthetic choices, the lavish ornamentation, imported marbles, and formal gardens, become signifiers that extend beyond mere decoration. They are interpreted as markers of status, intention, and cultural positioning. The mansion's visual rhetoric, originally designed to convey elegance and command, now intersects with ongoing public narratives, its walls quietly absorbing and refracting discourse about power, transparency, and accountability. Even more than its physicality, the estate's role as a focal point for controversy arises from the layering of historical and contemporary significance. While it retains the memory of its origins as a social epicenter for the elite, each new incident situates the mansion within evolving societal debates, making it a persistent touchstone for reflection on privilege and influence. The continuity of these controversies illustrates a broader principle: that architecture, particularly of this scale and ambition, cannot be disentangled from the context in which it exists. A building of such prominence inevitably becomes a mirror for collective anxieties, aspirations, and conflicts, its walls silently witnessing the interplay between public expectation and private desire. In this way, Mar-a-Lago is never simply static. It functions as a living archive of contention, accumulating layers of meaning that shift with every new event, every new story, and every new analysis. The estate's notoriety is further compounded by its symbolic resonance within the cultural imagination. Its terraces and halls are often photographed, dissected, and dramatized, creating a visual lexicon that underscores its role in national discourse. Each controversy adds texture to this lexicon, making the mansion a reference point not only for architectural splendor, but also for ongoing societal debates. The cycles of scrutiny, admiration, and critique feed upon one another, reinforcing Mar-a-Lago's presence in public life as a locus where questions of morality, legality, and social aspiration converge. In this respect, the mansion exemplifies how built environments can acquire a life beyond their material substance, their significance amplified by perception, narrative, and the enduring human fascination with wealth and authority. Ultimately, the continuing controversies surrounding Mar-a-Lago highlight the inseparability of architecture, power, and cultural discourse. Its gilded halls and manicured gardens are not passive elements, but active participants in the story of its public life, shaping how observers interpret influence, privilege, and visibility. Each legal challenge, media report, or public critique layers additional meaning onto the mansion, reinforcing its role as a barometer of societal tension and as a lens through which broader debates about wealth, authority, and accountability are examined. In remaining perpetually in the public eye, Mar-a-Lago demonstrates the persistent power of architecture not merely to shelter, but to narrate, to provoke, and to endure as a symbol of the complex interplay between material grandeur and human ambition, where controversy is not incidental but intrinsic to the legacy it projects. Mar-a-Lago's legacy is a tapestry woven from ambition, opulence, and the ceaseless interplay between private desire and public scrutiny, a monument that embodies both aspiration and caution. Its walls, meticulously constructed and lavishly adorned, speak of a vision that sought to transform a coastal estate into a symbol of enduring prestige, yet they also bear witness to the complexities and contradictions inherent in such endeavors. As a physical structure, the mansion asserts dominance through scale and style, but its true significance emerges from the stories it accumulates. Stories of wealth accumulated and displayed, of influence exercised and contested, and of societal fascination that continually refracts the image of power back upon itself. In examining Mar-a-Lago, one confronts a space where architectural achievement and cultural symbolism are inseparable, where the line between private sanctuary and public emblem blurs, and where every corridor, terrace, and chamber becomes a canvas onto which narratives of legacy, controversy, and aspiration are projected. The estate's history reveals a persistent tension between the intended and the perceived, between the grandeur envisioned by its creators and the evolving interpretations imposed by those who observe it. Over decades, the mansion has transitioned from a secluded emblem of elite leisure to a highly visible site that engages not only architectural aficionados, but also political observers, cultural critics, and the broader public. Each phase of its existence underscores a critical truth. Buildings of exceptional scale and ambition do not exist in isolation. They interact with society, accumulating layers of meaning that extend far beyond their material presence. Mar-a-Lago's gilded halls and expansive gardens, once conceived to impress and entertain within narrow social circles, now serve as a prism through which questions of wealth, influence, and moral accountability are continually refracted, inviting reflection on the broader human and cultural stakes of such concentrated power. Its complex legacy is further heightened by the paradox of visibility. The more prominent the mansion becomes, the more it functions as both a repository of admiration and a target for critique. Public fascination, amplified by media scrutiny, renders Mar-a-Lago simultaneously aspirational and contentious, a site where the celebration of achievement collides with the interrogation of privilege. This duality is mirrored in the mansion's very design, where opulent decoration and formal symmetry coexist with spaces shaped by security measures, functional compromises, and the labor required to sustain such grandeur. Every decorative flourish, every architectural gesture, can thus be read on multiple levels, an assertion of taste and status, a practical accommodation to social and political realities, and a subtle record of the tensions that underlie conspicuous display. Mar-a-Lago's endurance, despite shifting ownership, legal disputes, and public debate, attests to the durability of architectural vision and the persistent human attraction to symbols of power. Its ability to evoke both admiration and controversy underscores the complex interplay between material creation and cultural perception, illustrating how built spaces can transcend their physical boundaries to influence collective imagination. In its gardens and ballrooms, one finds echoes of earlier eras of elite display alongside the ever-present pressures of modern scrutiny, creating a layered narrative in which the mansion functions as a living archive of ambition, excess, and the moral ambiguities embedded in the pursuit of prominence. Ultimately, Mar-a-Lago embodies the intricate dialogue between legacy and temporality. It reminds us that architecture, particularly when entwined with wealth and influence, is never merely structural. It is performative, symbolic, and historically resonant. Its enduring significance lies not solely in its physical grandeur, but in the manner in which it continues to engage the imagination, provoke discourse, and reflect the aspirations, contradictions, and ethical complexities of those who inhabit, observe, or interpret it. In this way, the estate's lasting imprint is not confined to stone, marble, or landscape gardens, but extends into the cultural consciousness, serving as a testament to the enduring power of architecture to shape and be shaped by the forces of society, perception, and the human desire to leave a mark upon the world.